We are living in a highly charged political climate. We're not going to talk about politics in this particular video, but I do want to draw a parallel between a narrative that's being pumped into our minds every day through legacy media and how some of us are actually living a false narrative because of what we are being told. Specifically, I'm talking about abuse in marriages. Hello everyone, Rick Thomas here with Daniel Berger. This is another episode of Life Over Coffee with Daniel Berger and Rick Thomas, and there's the coffee. Daniel was talking to me before we did this shoot here about this parallel that he sees with this false narrative that's being pressed upon us through television, the news outlets, and again, we're not going to focus on politics, but you made an astute connection between, like in a marriage where a husband or a wife is communicating something that's not true. Some people call it gaslighting, which is a fair term. But explain to us this connection that you're seeing between what's happening in the political news media versus what we see on the ground day to day in many typical marriages, sad to say.
Yeah, and I mean, gaslighting, projecting, all these different terms we often use. But what I've noticed just in the recent weeks, you know, we're obviously just ended the election, is still ongoing, not determined, etc.
The election day is turned into election month.
That's right. Yeah. And so what we're seeing is one group of people essentially say, if you don't accept the narrative, even though, again, it's not actually been officially certified that we have a president.
Right.
Then you begin to question, like they're doing with Trump. You have dozens and dozens of people on the left saying he's psychologically not sound, and I'm quoting, he's crazy, he needs to be put in a mental ward. So what they're essentially saying is they recognize that he's delusional, and that's historically been the idea of madness or insanity, lunacy.
And I heard one commentator said that he's struggling with PTSD,
right, because
of what Trump is doing.
Right.
Which is, you could listen to that. Okay, so you can believe the narrative, and then you get on that anti-Trump train. And again, we're not taking a political position here, but just talking about how someone's taking a narrative that's not true and twisting it, communicating it as true, and some people can believe a false narrative.
Yeah, or you know, you don't have to even be aware of what's been going on in the news lately over the last 4 years. There's clearly been a setup to say there's been collusion when there hasn't been. There's been, you know, talking about Kavanaugh, for example, there was these accusations made. So there was a lot of disunity being spread through controlling a narrative. And then the same people now are saying we need to be unified. Now that we're in control, what's wrong with you people? Why are you disunified? And so that's that project. The very thing that you're doing is the thing that actually you're saying they're doing, you're actually doing.
All right, so now bring that into marriages where we live, we interact with these, what you just described on a cultural wide scale, specifically in the political arena. Bring that down to marriage, and how does that happen?
Yeah, and this is
what's happening, and how does it happen?
For those people who don't know, we don't script these conversations. So, you know, we want the Spirit to lead us in the conversation. So I'm going to take a liberty here and add to this even parenting, and not just marriage.
Yeah. Okay, good.
You know, we if we can control a narrative, we can essentially determine who's delusional, if I can say it that way.
Right.
So. And for those of you who may not know, the definition from a secular standpoint of delusion is a false fixed belief that is, despite clear evidence, and then that is not socially accepted, essentially. Enough people have to agree that this is true. So, for example...
well, you could say that I'm handsome, and you just keep saying that over and over again, and people could clearly see...
So they would be delusional if they accepted that, right?
It's obviously not true. And you look at me, and any reasonable person would say, well, that's not true.
Right.
But eventually you make me believe that.
Right. And if enough people believe, the fear of man kicks in, right? and something we can talk about in other videos. But when the fear of man is there, now we get concerned about being in the group that's not true. So, you know,
groupthink.
Groupthink, absolutely.
So this person would not want to go counter to what you are saying, because the fear of man is toward you.
That's right.
That they want your approval or they don't want your rejection. Therefore, they kick their brains in neutral, go with the crowd. You have an echo chamber of a false narrative.
Right. So the way one of my books, The Insanity of Madness, I wrote it this way: the person who controls concepts of truth, we would call that a narrative. So it's not actually truth, but if you're determining what people should accept as true, you also get to determine what is false. And so that's why you're hearing, and again, we're not criticizing the left, we're just showing what's happening right now. As soon as you say somebody is mad or delusional or insane, et cetera, you've identified that they are embracing delusions. Essentially, you're saying, you're not accepting our truth, therefore you're delusional. So how does this work in marriage? In the last year, I've seen this increase dramatically, and not just in marriages, but in parenting as well. Mm-hmm. I've also seen this with a young man who was homeless that God had ordained for me to talk with this happen. I've seen it in multiple people labeled as mentally ill as well, where what has happened is, let's use specifically a husband, he verbally belittles his wife over and over and over again, and when she goes to get help, he immediately says, no, you're the one who belittles me, and you know, so he's controlling this narrative to the point where he starts telling people, well, really, I think she's insane. I've heard bipolar. She's bipolar. She's, you know, this type of thing. In fact, numerous people have come to me, not only receiving a diagnosis because of being in an abusive relationship, but even on drugs, being controlled by the drugs, so that the spouse, and I want to be careful because this can go both ways, right? So women are able, many very strong women, strong-willed women, are able to do the exact same thing to their husbands. And so we see this. I've seen kids do this to their parents. So we have to be careful that we don't just think that this is a husband to a wife or a wife to a husband. It can be a parent to a child or a child to a parent. There's any age group can control a narrative in order to dominate and make the other feel like they're crazy.
Yeah, whatever your agenda is, a devious agenda we're talking about, you create a false story, a false narrative. You promote that false narrative to anyone that will listen, and even try to have greater leverage, coerciveness to force that opinion. Yeah, you're right. Teenagers can do that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, like say with a teenager, there could be an element of truth in what they are saying. That, you know, dad did do this, mom did do this, but they take that and it becomes something like this. And now really they're communicating something that's not accurate. And that seems to be a little harder to discern because there's an element of truth in what they are saying. By the way, I was thinking about that we were talking about the political left, the media or whatever. Many of them have genuine motives. They have a desire to want to help. Unfortunately, they have a utopian view of society, or they believe in the general goodness of humanity, and because of that belief, their good desire to help people gets skewed. And then when we attack them, because we can collectively put them in a group, and we ourselves can be communicating a hybrid message of truth and untruth if we collectively categorize all of them as bad people. I have talked to many people on the political left. In a recent video we did, I don't know how it's going to drop, but you talked about psychiatrists who have a genuine desire to help people, but they're embracing a false truth, and so they're promoting a false truth out of a genuine desire to help. And so we don't want to be reactionary to things that are, from our view, are obviously wrong by categorizing them as having evil motives. I don't think all of them do.
Yeah, and to your point, I just was thinking of a situation years ago when I was a school administrator. We had a young man who he was not paying attention in school, so immediately teachers came to me, is this ADHD? You know, is this some type of deficit in attention? And over the course of time, I mean, people became convinced. And so when he came into my office, and it wasn't the first time, sadly, but eventually I asked, what's going on? What things are going on in your life that maybe, and quickly we found out his dad had died and he had told no one. Well, obviously he's not going to want to pay attention to 2 + 2 = 4
Right.
if he's grieving this loss. I mean, you give attention to the greatest value. So what we were doing was we had an idea of what was going on. We basically had established a false truth of what was taking place in that academic environment, when in fact, when we gained the truth, it became clear. We were essentially saying, you know, you're this, when in fact it wasn't. Now, I wasn't saying he was ADHD,
Right.
but...
Right. Okay. Well, this, you said a while ago that this is not scripted. No, this video has gone somewhere where I had not anticipated. I want to share a story.
Doesn't it always?
I want to share a story with you. 10th grade typing class, me and Jimmy Robertson, this was like our first day of class, and he was sitting across from me. Now, a 10th grade typing class when I was a kid meant we had typewriters.
Yeah.
That actually mechanical typewriters. He was sitting across from me, and for whatever reason, we started laughing like two immature 10th graders would do. We weren't doing anything wrong as far as being premeditatively mischievous. You know, we just got in one of those moments where the more you try not to laugh, you do, and you're not really doing anything mean at all,
Right.
just being immature. My 10th grade teacher said, I had your brothers, talking to me. I'm the fourth of 5 children. She said, I had your brothers, and now I have you. I'm not going to put up with it. That was an exasperating moment for me because of the meanness of my brothers who had gone before me. None of us had first names. We were all collectively called Thomas. We were the Thomas kids, and the one that set the narrative was my oldest, who eventually went to prison, was eventually murdered. And so, yeah, that's the kind of life that he lived. I actually wanted to do well in school. I wanted to be different than the family that I was brought up in. And it was just like an imprinting moment on my soul.
Absolutely.
When I'm not going to call her name. I don't have any issues toward my 10th grade typing teacher, and God bless her. But what she said, that statement has lasted now 45 plus years. I had you brothers, I'm not going to have you. And so she had a preconceived narrative
Right.
over this name called Thomas. And all you had to do is kind of slightly fit within this box or get close to this box. And if you did, boom, the hammer came down and there was no recourse. And that's the appeal that I would make to all of us. We're talking about let's say the political left. Before we categorize everybody as being devious or whatever we want to say, biblical counselors, Christians, should have more discernment. We should have more wisdom. We should be more gentle. We should be kinder when we interact with these things. But if we just look at everything on the surface and label it as we see it, we can go into some dangerous places. If you all want to talk about this, please just throw some comments in the video. If you have questions about it, if you want us to interact with more, I mean, this thing, what we're talking about, it did go in another direction, and it seems like it's bigger than, maybe we need to talk about some more of this later. Perhaps we'll do another video. Thank you for watching. Daniel Berger, Rick Thomas,
Thanks, Rick.
Life Over Coffee. God bless.